Love is a powerful weapon in the hands of human traffickers.
In the United States, most sex trafficking victims were originally recruited by someone they loved or trusted.
By understanding how human trafficking really works, you can make a difference in the life of someone at risk.
For more information, please visit polarisproject.org.
Help is available. Text Be Free to 233-733 or call the National Human Trafficking Hotline 888-373-7888. Together, let's stop violence against women.
We also have some sad news from Hollywood. The family of actress Heche says she is now legally dead, her body being kept on life support for possible organ donation.
Heche was a very popular actress in the 90s and 2000s and has been in a lot of films such as I Know What You Did Last Summer, 6 Days, 7 Nights, Return to Paradise. She's been in a lot of films and she's a very big actress. And many of you might also know her because of her short-lasting relationship that she had with Ellen DeGeneres. But underneath her stardom was a very troubled past and childhood. In her book titled Call Me Crazy, she talks about her family's financial situations where she would have to move basically from house after house after house with her and her family. And she also talks about the sexual abuse that she faced from her father when she was an infant up until she was 12 years old. She mentions details like how her father would undress in front of her and also how she even ended up contracting herpes from him. And she also talks about what she went through in an interview that she did with Barbara Walters in 2001.
I believe I was sexually abused by my father from the time I was a very young girl, actually before I could speak, up until the time I was 12.
How did he abuse you?
In my memory,
Yes.
he raped me. He stuck his in my mouth. He fondled me. He put me on all fours and had sex with me.
When you were a toddler?
In my memory, yes.
She also goes on to tell her about how this abuse was so extreme that it broke her mind to the point where she created a fantasy world for herself where she took on the personality that she called Celestia.
I had another personality. I had a fantasy world that I escaped to. I called my other personality Celestia. I called the other world that I created for myself the fourth dimension. I believed I was from that world. I believed I was from another planet. I think I was insane.
And this is an excerpt that Heche wrote that's from her book, Call Me Crazy. My mother's father was dying and she spent most of her days crying. Dad was off all the time and our money was on a tight line. Nothing was coming in, which was something close to sin. The children were crabby, my herpes were scabby. We were all getting sick, the walls of denial so thick. It was bad and getting worse and things stolen from Mom's purse. It was all crashing down, there was no smile, only frown. It was all stinking bad, and we were all really sad. Anne also talks about that when her parents split up, her father went to go move to New York where he lived his life as an openly gay man. But that lifestyle ended up leading to him contracting AIDS, which he lied about, telling his family that it was cancer because he was ashamed of his homosexuality. Anne also talks about that the reason why she was attracted to Ellen was because of how she was a direct contrast to her father. Because her father was ashamed of his homosexuality while Ellen was proud. And that contrast of pride was what attracted Anne to Ellen. And later on in Anne's life, after she got years of therapy, she tried to tell her mother about the abuse that she experienced from her father, but when she tried to tell her about it, her own mother
Hung up the phone on me. To have gone through so much work to heal myself and have my mother not acknowledge in any way that she was sorry for what had happened to me broke my heart.
And she also talks about that the whole reason why she wanted to enter the film industry anyway was because she wanted to earn her father's love, because her father loved movie stars. And she also said that she wanted to be like Jesus and change the world because her mother loved Jesus. So she essentially just wanted to live her life in a way that her parents would love her.
I think everything I've done in all my insanity was trying to get my parents to love me. My father loved movie stars. I decided I needed to become famous to get his love. My mother loved Jesus. That was her thing. So I wanted to become Jesus Christ. I wanted to save the world to get her love. I went to the utmost of extremes.
A movie star to get your father to love you, Jesus Christ to get your mother to love you.
Absolutely. It was a race. I had them neck and neck. I would do anything I possibly could, just...
So yeah, rough family, rough childhood, and very rough memories. And unfortunately, her life ended very tragically. In August of 2022, Anne Heche ended up getting into a car accident where her car was going over 90 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone, and she crashed directly into someone's home. From there, the car set on fire, and then it took firefighters over an hour to get to her because they first had to extinguish all the flames and then bring in equipment to pull her car out of the home so that way they could actually get to her. And while this was all happening, Anne was still fully conscious because one of the firefighters there, Captain Eric Scott, talks about how she was talking to them while they were trying to get her out of her car. Once they got her out of the car, they put her on a stretcher and then loaded her onto an ambulance to take her to the UCLA Medical Center, where many of you might have seen that very viral clip where Anne Heche sits up on the stretcher and then they load her in. And some people thought that she was actually getting out of a body bag, but it was actually a white burn sheet that was put over her because of burns that she had on her body due to her being in a car fire. So that's what that clip is. But still, watching that clip never fails to make me uncomfortable, though. And in between that time she was being rushed to the hospital and when she arrived was when she ended up slipping into a coma that she never woke up from. The car crash was on August 5th, and 6 days later on August 11th was when she was pronounced legally dead. But before I go deeper into that, first I need to talk about a movie that she starred in called Girl in Room 13, which released only 1 month after she was pronounced dead. And the main plot of that movie is about human trafficking. The movie opens with a young girl named Grace who ended up having a diving injury, which ended up leading to her getting prescribed pain meds. And that addiction to pain meds ended up leading to her forming an opioid addiction. And the movie opens with her celebrating 30 days of sobriety where she just got out of rehab. But once she gets out, she ends up getting taken in this staged kidnapping that's set up by one of her friends, Red, and also her ex-boyfriend who used to be one of her former drug dealers named Richie. Once Richie kidnaps Grace, he ends up taking her to this hotel where he takes her into room 13 where he proceeds to sexually assault her. And this motel that she's in is actually a place that's specifically set up for the purpose of taking women there so that way they can be assaulted to the point where they're broken enough to be trafficked. Everyone else assumes that Grace went to go relapse, but Anne Heche's character Janie, the mother, knows that something worse has happened to her. While Janie goes out to try to look for Grace, Grace continues to get assaulted by Richie and also gets drugged and gets alcohol forced down her throat and basically just continues to get abused by Richie until she gets so catatonic that she doesn't even try to fight back or escape anymore. And every time she has tried to escape, she always ends up getting found and taken back by Richie into the room. And there's also a scene of Grace and Richie together where not only does he plan on selling her, but he also plans on making tapes of her where he expects her to pretty much become a cam girl and Richie shows Grace a video of another kidnapped girl where so Grace can essentially learn from it and know what to do. And I think this scene is actually very important because no one really talks about cam girls that could be getting abused because I think everyone just assumes that because they're in front of the camera that it's all consensual. But the truth is that's not always the case, and a lot of these cam girls are forced into it by traffickers. I mean, think about it. On sites where you could have hundreds of guys watching one girl, you could be getting hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of donations from just one girl, which would make you much more money than if you were just a seller to one person. Plus, if the owners of those sites are also making a lot of money through these trafficked girls that are becoming cam girls, do you really think they're going to care whether or not there's consent involved? Of course they're not, because they're only going to care about the money they're making. And there's also a lot of writing in this movie where it's less about fitting into a scene and pretty much more about kind of like sending a message to the audience. Like there's one scene between Anne Heche's character and her husband where he says something along the lines of like suburban girls don't get trafficked, only immigrants that don't speak English get trafficked.
Janie, honey, white middle-class girls don't get sold. Okay, that only happens to poor immigrants who, I don't know, are here illegally and don't speak English. Not to girls like Grace.
We're a middle-class family.
You mean you're white? It's a misconception that this is an immigrant problem. 83% of sex trafficking victims are U.S. citizens.
By some estimates, there are up to 50,000 sex trafficked victims every year in the United States.
And also, just side note, I want to say that everyone's acting in this movie was actually really good. Especially Anne Heche, she did a really good job at really portraying a mother that doesn't know where her daughter is and doesn't know what could be happening to her. The movie goes on to when Grace is getting ready to be sold by Richie to someone that he's conspiring with, but before she gets sold, the guy tells Richie that he wants to test the merchandise and essentially see if she's subservient enough and pretty much broken enough. But before this guy can actually assault Grace, Anne Heche's character ends up finding out the motel that Grace is being kidnapped in, and she starts banging on all the doors and yelling for her daughter. And when Grace hears her mother's voice, this causes her to fight back against her attacker and then smash a lamp over him, and then she starts screaming for her mother. And then Anne Heche starts to follow the sounds of her daughter screaming until she gets to room 13, where she finally finds her and they hug. The trafficker quickly tries to make a break for it, but then the police arrive and they arrest both the trafficker and Richie. So fortunately, the movie does end on a good note. And the movie goes on to tell the audience statistics like how there's 25 million people being trafficked and how these traffickers need assistance from different people and different companies and how they assist them. And they also go on to talk about how traffickers make over $150 billion a year. And yeah, it's pretty much a revolving door of effects where you traffic someone, they make you a lot of money, then you use that money to buy property and businesses that help make trafficking easier. Then you traffic more people, you make more money, you buy more businesses and property, and it pretty much just grows from there. And by the way, for anyone who wants to watch the movie, I watched it for free with ads on a website called fossum.org, and for anyone who's curious, I'll leave a link in the description. But yeah, that's basically the plot of Girl in Room 13. So now let's go back to Anne Heche's car accident. So before Anne Heche's car accident, she went and stopped at a wig shop, and she also took a photo with the wig shop owner at 10:35 a.m., and the owner described her as cordial and kind, and in other words, not impaired or weird at all. And then only 21 minutes later at 10:56 a.m. was when she actually crashed into the home where her car set on fire. But in between that time, she actually had another crash where she ended up running into an apartment garage. And there's actually a video that's taken of this after she crashes into this garage where you can hear someone demanding Anne to get out of the car.
No, out of the car. No, out of the car. Out of the car.
I'm out of here.
And another thing as well is after she crashed her car into this garage, someone went up to her passenger side window and took a photo of Anne Heche where you can see clearly a bottle of alcohol, and this photo was published by TMZ after she got into her crash. And there's another video as well that was taken where someone is just conveniently recording the road where Anne Heche just happens to speed down going over 90 miles an hour. That video is very weird because, as you can see, there is nothing that's noteworthy of filming. So why was this person just conveniently filming the road that Anne Heche just happens to be going down where she would just crash just a couple minutes later? That makes zero sense. Why was someone just conveniently filming the road at that time that Anne Heche was going down? I don't know, but it's very weird. But yeah, Anne Heche ends up crashing her car into this home on the 5th. She gets pronounced dead 6 days later on the 11th, but then she's kept on life support until the 14th, so her organs can be harvested. Now look, I want to believe as much as the next person that her organs truly went to people who did need them, but at the same time, knowing the industry of Hollywood and Los Angeles and just how demonic that industry is, how do we know for sure that our organs actually went to people who did need them and not to something that's much worse? I hope that I'm wrong, but at the same time, how do we know, right? And the sad thing as well is that on the 11th, the same date that Anne Heche was pronounced dead, there were so many tabloids that were framing her as someone who was driving under the influence, because when her blood was taken, there were traces of cannabis, cocaine, and benzos that were found in her system. And because of that, there were so many journals and tabloids that were pretty much framing her as nothing but someone who was driving under the influence. And the crash was even investigated as a felony DUI. But it wasn't until her autopsy came out in December that finally cleared her name and revealed that all of that stuff that was found in her blood was from days prior, and that while she was driving and on that date, she wasn't under the influence of anything. So if it wasn't drugs or alcohol that was causing Anne Heche to go that fast at the time of the crash, then what was it? Because if you ask me, I think something was done to her car that caused her to go that fast. Whether her brakes were tampered with or her steering wheel was messed with, I think that something did happen to her car. But because the investigation was never reopened or a new case wasn't started, now we'll never know if anything was done to her car that caused her to crash. And here's another interesting detail about this case. On August 6, just one day after her crash, Anne Heche was called stable by her representatives, including one of her friends and podcast partners, and also one of her ex-boyfriends. And her ex-boyfriend even went as far to say that Anne Heche was expected to pull through, which is a very insane thing to say about someone unless you know whether or not that they're actually going to pull through something like that. And I'm not saying that it's impossible that someone can go from stable to critical very fast, especially something like a car accident. But to say that someone is expected to pull through and then they end up back in critical condition and then they're just pronounced dead a couple days later, that is also very suspicious to me, considering the circumstances regarding Anne Heche. Now I'm going to go back to the photo that I was talking about of Anne Heche after she crashed into that apartment garage, where she looks into the camera and you can see that bottle of alcohol in her cup holder. And I'm going to give you some reasons why this photo is very suspicious. The first thing is that in her autopsy, there was no traces of alcohol that was found in her system. It was only benzos, cannabis, and cocaine. But there was no traces of alcohol at all found in her system. So the fact that she does have a bottle that is in her cup holder is very weird. Now, I'm not saying that can't be explained away, because maybe it could have been for someone else, or maybe she hadn't drunk it yet, and I'm not ruling any of that out. But I am saying that for a photo like that, and having someone conveniently come up to her driver's side window to take a photo, and then have that photo be published by TMZ just minutes after she gets into a very bad crash, with a photo like that, it would be very, very convenient for the LAPD to see a photo like that, rule the crash as a felony DUI, and then the second that Anne Heche is pronounced dead, completely close the investigation, including looking at her car to see if there was any foul play or any tampering involved in it. When you factor all of that into it, the photo becomes very, very suspicious, because we still don't know who took that photo. No one has come up or come forward to say that they've taken it, so the actual person who's taken this photo's identity still remains unknown. The only reason we have this photo is because TMZ published it after Anne Heche got into that car accident. Now, if we are to assume that Anne Heche's car windows were all down, including when she went into that wig shop, what's stopping the theory that maybe someone was stalking her, saw that her car windows were down, and then the second that she went into that shop, maybe went and planted the bottle, and then have someone else come in to take a photo of that planted alcohol, so that way you could easily rule that photo as a case of someone driving under the influence. Because let's remember, there was no alcohol found in her system at the autopsy, but Anne Heche did have past problems with alcoholism. So for someone to plant something like that in her car, it would have to be someone who would know about her past experiences with alcoholism and then would use that as a weapon to frame her as driving under the influence. I know it's very out there and I know it's very far-fetched, but how do we know, right? And I guess since we're already going there, it would also be very weird and strange that that same person that is responsible for planting that bottle also had a talk show that aired its last episode just a little over 2 months ago, and they were probably feeling very angry about it and wanted to take it out on someone who they already had resentment toward for ending a relationship, and talking about a harmful industry such as human trafficking that they have heavy ties to and would want to protect. Allegedly. But yeah, I do believe 100% that Anne Heche was murdered because there's just too many loose ends that make zero sense. Like, we still don't know why she wanted to buy a wig. We don't know why she was going 90 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone. We don't know for sure why she had alcohol, considering that there was no alcohol found in her autopsy. And we don't know why the LAPD never reopened another investigation after they found out that Anne Heche was not driving under the influence. And we don't know why her ex-boyfriend would say something like she was expected to pull through and then would just pass away like 5 days later. That is also very, very strange. That's just too many coincidences to ignore. And when you factor in the fact that she did have a very troubled past, and she did have struggles with things like drugs and alcoholism, it would be very easy to weaponize that to frame her as crazy and frame her as someone who is driving recklessly and use that to defame her and slander her when she dies. But when you put all of the pieces together, you realize that who Anne Heche truly was a woman who had a very troubled past and conquered it and wanted to spend the rest of her life saving women and young girls from the same mind-breaking, horrible fate that she faced herself when she was a child. You are not crazy. You are Anne Heche. And you died a fighter who refused to stay silent. Rest in peace.
Together, let's stop violence against women.